Hi, welcome everyone. I'm actually so excited to be here and I've got this thing on my mind. I just feel like sharing with you all. And it's in my field, my professional field of architecture. As you know, I'm an architect. I studied architecture in Ife, Nigeria. And I did my PhD here I did my PhD in South Africa in architecture, and I was looking at the informal settlements in my studies. And something that bothered me about those settlements was that they are in every big city. Every big city you go into, you would find informal settlements. You would find people who live in the informal settlements, make their life around the informal settlements for various reasons, you know. And then why it even becomes more concerning is that there are generations that are living, some were born in the informal settlements, they've grown up in the settlements, and they have their children in the settlements. So there's something about it that is quite intriguing. I actually wrote an article about that with a colleague of mine, and we titled it Normal Informality. That idea of normal informality, because something that persists, it's tending to normality. It's normal to see this settlement all over the place, not just in Africa, by the way. In developing countries, in developed countries, you would find level of informalities in our city. Looking at it from a point of view, from a perspective of normality, as an architect, made me really start considering that whole idea of form follow function. What does that mean? It means that the built form, follows the functionality that it is supposed to provide. Thinking about it critically, does form truly follow function when we look at the informal settlement? Or does form follow funds? To say, if you have the funds, then you can build an architectural edifice. You can build something magnificent, something beautiful. It means that once you consider the function that built form is supposed to have, then the form will come onto it. However, when we look at the informal settlements, we start seeing form following the funds. The functionality of what they're building is determined by their affordability. So within the study, I found out that there were some dwellings that were so small that when they sleep in it, their legs are hanging out. Their legs are not covered. So that shelter does not cover their whole body. Can you imagine? The level of deprivation or the level of lack, to the point that our built form, in some cases, particularly in informal settlements, does not provide sufficient shelter for those who need it. And now questioning what our role is as architects, And then someone wrote that architects knows something about everything. When you're in architecture school, you do a bit of psychology, architectural psychology, you do a bit of engineering, you have to understand engineering drawings, you have to understand even relationship. How do you get your client to understand? How do you understand your client's needs? How do you convince them that you can deliver on what is so that the architect tends to know a lot about everything. If a racer comes to me, I need to understand where is he coming from, what could be his lifestyle, what could be his needs in terms of the special needs, even the built form needs, So it's quite an exciting, quite an involved process. You want to create something out of nothing. You want to create this edifice. You want to create this form out of nothing, right? Based on the brief that you receive from the clients. Another thought in terms of this architectural need will be that the building or the built form grows naturally and logically and poetically out of the conditions that it finds itself in. And this again is what happens in the informal settlements. You would find that somebody who is just able to provide shelter for his body, shelter from the elements, shelter, very, very basic, very, very rudimentary kind of shelter, just to keep one protected from the elements. These shacks, these shanty towns in jondolos are made out of. But eventually, we have seen in some of these informal settlements that eventually they start evolving. It starts growing logically. Yes, the shelter couldn't cover my whole body, it's just covering my leg. Okay, let me add something on, or let me change the materials I'm using. So there is this level of evolving, within the settlement, even as household conditions improve, as people get to know, even understand their own needs better. They understand that, oh, apart from covering myself, sheltering myself from the elements, I probably need somewhere to cook. I can't cook outside if it's raining, so they want to bring it in. And so you find these things, it's evolving. And when we look at vernacular architecture, that's another way of saying traditional. Some will say traditional architecture. Vernacular architecture is actually like indigenous, it's now looking at indigenous knowledge systems. It then says that it is the beginning of something new in terms of the build form that we are now working towards. So when we look at those vernacular architecture, you may look at the Yoruba culture, you may look at the Zulu homesteads. I mean, there are just so many. And you start seeing how, with the Zulu in particular, how there is a main hut, it's not informal, it's traditional, it's vernacular, has some level of informality around it, but it's more a recognized cultural and traditional building type. You would then have it evolving. So as the family grows, the firstborn son grows, he gets his own hut, the second son grows, and then the settlements spread. By the way, it's what is happening in informal settlements. So you have an informal settlement starting off as just one shack, right? Go back soon afterwards, it has grown, and there is this connectivity amongst all those who live within the settlement. So it's quite an interesting, I think it's quite an interesting thing to observe, but also consider, so that when we understand the problem, we can provide the solution, right? If you understand the problem, you can provide the solution. So the first step to solving that problem of growing or sprawling in informal settlements is to understand what is the problem, right? And then when you get that, you are now able to start seeing, how do we mitigate those issues? How do we solve those issues? And it's a human settlements problem. We call it human settlements here in South Africa, but it's a global issue. People need shelter. People need places to stay. People need to be able to dwell. You can unpack the whole idea of dwelling. What does it mean? Being in connection with their spaces, being in connection with their communities, so that they can have a thriving life. So when we now look at how architects would operate, it's more than just designing. Architecture is actually about solving problems that are entangled with, connected with, that are engaged with the built environment. How do we solve this built environment and create a beautiful, harmonious environment that not just provides the basic need of shelter, but has a psychological, a philosophical, a harmonious impact on those that use it. And it comes in by dealing with all the elements, the elements of water, the elements of trees, the natural environment, the spiritual environment, the physical environment, the hills and the mountains, those constraints that come. And when you are able to bring them in, the whole cosmic environment, the climatic environment, where does the sun rise up from? Where does it set? How does the wind blow? How does the water flow? And how can you create a built form that sits harmoniously within the natural environment. If you can do that, then you are creating a sustainable built environment that is not just formal or informal. I mean, I can do a whole talk about what is formal, what is informal, where does informality end, and where does formality begin. That's a whole discussion on its own. But at the end of the day, we can say that a good building reveals different things. It meets different aspects. It brings cohesion. It brings about harmony between the users and the built environment. Right. Yo, that has been a bit academic. So what do you take away from it? I think as a layman, you can take away that architecture is about solving problems, and you cannot solve a problem until you identify the problem. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you think you want to know more, you can share, have a discussion about it, and just enjoy the video. Thanks. Ciao.